Welcome to this week's episode of The Blaze Bell Show. Today's guest is a rapper, spiritual teacher, and vocal powerhouse, Stevie the Blessed. Together, we discuss our paths to spirituality, lucid dreaming, how to follow the nudges, how to connect to our higher selves, my obsession with Stevie's TikTok, and the beauty of rest, tears, and rage. This is a powerful conversation, so let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Woo! I'm here today with Stevie the Blessed. I call you Stevie the Blessed. That is your celebrity TikTok situation.
That's the full persona there. Stevie or Stevie the Blessed. Honestly, I'll take to either.
Okay, I love it. So we met not too long ago, and you are a spiritual practitioner, a spiritual TikTok star. You have all kinds of things going on, and every time you're around, I'm like, oh, maybe if I can just get a little closer to her and get some more of that energy, please. So thank you so much for doing this tonight. This is so awesome.
Honestly, it's definitely an honor to be here. What is odd to me is like as soon as we ended up, especially connecting on social media, where I get a chance to peep a little bit because I'm a little curious and nosy. I was like, we know all the same people. We do similar things because you're in music and I'm in music as well, and we're both absolutely centered around healing. So I'm like, how have I not already met Blaze? Like, and especially your name too. You just seem like that cool chick that I would have known. So when Rev like already had met you, he's like, oh, he's like, I got you covered, you are going to be so happy. So I think I can say likewise in all areas there, so it's definitely a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good. Well, and I always think like trust the timing when different people enter our lives. Because, there's some times where we could have met and we probably wouldn't have gone that well.
Yeah, indeed, and I believe that too. I'm just like, you know what, clearly if we do have this many mutuals and it's just now that we're crossing paths, then that is divine and I'm not going to question that. So
Yeah. And I actually, because I'm in such an aligned part of my journey, I get really excited about who I'm going to meet. Because I know, it's just a different space. And so I meet so many amazing people right now. It's so good.
I think that's a really good point because sometimes I've been in places where I'm just like immediately alert because I'm like, based on where I'm at, you're a test. And I already know that. So, like, when you get to different places in life, you kind of know what you're attracting based on where your head is at. So, I think that's kind of funny.
Yeah. Okay, so a spiritual practitioner. I want to know like what led you to that space? What made you want to do that? I'd never even heard of it until a few months ago that it was an option. So tell us more
Yeah.
about that.
I think honestly, I found myself doing a lot of solo work when it came to my spirituality for many, many years. I would say probably about 10 years ago was when I recommitted really heavily into my spirituality. And I spent a lot of years just kind of with friends that didn't understand and family that didn't quite get it. So I just found myself with Google a lot of the times and in libraries and books and just so enveloped in the knowledge and trying to understand and figure out me. And it got to the point where I just kept getting this inkling that the next step for me like was going to involve a community, and there was really no way around that, and I had no idea where to turn, just being in Alaska and having a lot of people in my immediate circles that were not remotely concerned with that area of life. And so I just remember literally meditating on this idea of a community, and that was something that kind of came up quite a bit before I found it. And I wish I had a crazier story, but literally after meditating one day, I just got on Google because what better to do? And I started typing up spiritual places in Anchorage so I could start somewhere. And I mean, the rest is history. I ended up at the center just to check them out, but it was really nice because before I went in person, I had a chance to listen to some of the speakers online. So I had a chance to get a feel for what their topics were. And I'm always the person that's kind of looking for a sign. And at that time, I had just done my first paint night, which was just really symbolic for me because I loved it. Didn't realize I could paint until I was an adult. And the painting that we did was a picture of a tree that had leaves falling, and it had a really prominent bridge in the background. And it just felt really symbolic for where I was in life at that time. Like I was crossing this huge bridge and these leaves were falling. I only listened to 2 of the 50 plus sermons that they had posted on the website when I was just scrolling through, and I picked them at random. And the first one that I listened to, the speaker was actually Camille, and she was using this incredible metaphor of this tree and how when leaves fall, it's just that time. So when I tell you, it just spoke to me. I knew where I was supposed to be. I sat in the very back row, hoping as just a audience member I could come in on Sundays and sneak right out and just get a feel for the place. I think I'm probably going to blame Steiner on this, because before I knew it, I was moving further up in the rows and getting involved in classes, and 5 years just goes by like that, and before you know it, you're serving. So it's just kind of incredible.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Right.
Were you raised religious? Like, where did all this
Yeah.
curiosity come from?
Yeah, my neither one of my parents were like extremely religious, but we lived not too far from my mom's mother for a decent part of my childhood, and she would go to church, Christian, Pentecostal, very much so routinely every Sunday. She was very involved in the church, and so every weekend, my siblings and I would go spend the weekend with her. So we were absolutely getting dressed up on Sundays and going to church as well, and I think from a young age, the fact that my parents weren't really involved, but we were going, I always questioned things. So I felt like I was already hesitant about it, because it was like, it was that important. But there was something about the energy of Christ that also captivated me at a very young age. So I always felt connected to something to do with the church, but also at a strange disconnect. But it was probably a good 6 to 7 years consistently that I was going, where that religion kind of ended up sprouting into, later spirituality.
Well, and I really love, like, what resonates with you resonates with me. And I don't think there are a whole lot of people out there who give themselves permission to explore. And I know why, because so many of us are told something from a young age and just gets stuck in there. And that's okay. I think if it's serving people to be this religion or that, go for it. If it's, you know, but for me, I was raised very religious, and it was just my mom and I swear I thought God was my dad. And I was like, oh, cool, what up? And I just had this like very lighthearted vibe
Oh my
about all of it, as I do. And I thought it was fun. And then I went through, and I also was like into the rules. And I am kind of a square about rules. And so
I'm like, I can't relate, but I can in a sense, though. So
I know nobody around ever. It surprises everyone. They're like, Blaze. Anyway, so I liked that I knew what was expected of me. Like it felt easy to me. And then I ended up going through a lot of like a big trauma. And in that moment, I don't share this very often, but you'll probably think it's funny, or funny might not be the right word. But I was involved in this traumatic event, and during it my mom had grown up telling me, like, if there's ever a bad guy, if something happens, just scream, like, in the name of Jesus, leave, and Satan will leave. And I did that in this moment, and I'm like, in the name of Jesus, leave. It was like, and it definitely like shook the moment for a second,
right,
but the
right.
person didn't leave. And it was like, that's all it took, where it's like brain rewiring. I mean, trauma is so interesting how quickly it's like in 1 hour of my life, I stopped believing in God. I stopped
Mhm.
believing that men were safe. I stopped believing that my house was safe. I stopped believing that the world was the way I thought it was. Like,
Everything was rewritten.
full shift. Yeah. So,
Oh,
it was through actually recovery after that event. I ended up going through addiction, and during my recovery they were like, well, you get to decide your higher power. And that's when I started really exploring what else is out there, what actually resonates with me, where I'm at today. So now I've got my alien ring, I've got all kinds of fun stuff that feels good to me today.
I respect that so much, because to your point, for whatever reason, it's very easy to get married to what we, and whether that be no spirituality or no religious foundation at all, because we weren't introduced to that, or if it be something that we kind of outgrow. And my grandma had a lot of influence on the entire family. So when word got out that Stevie was no longer claiming Christian anymore, it definitely was kind of a tough moment where I had to kind of make a choice and a decision on where I stood because I didn't want to be in that in between. And so for me, it was like, yeah, I'm going non-denominational. And from there, it's just going to open up every door that I need. And I think it's just, like you said, crazy how one moment can kind of switch and your beliefs are tested to an extent, and then you get rewired. And I think for me, I had a lot of very traumatic and spiritual experiences that tested everything about God being outside of myself. And for me to be tapping into such a strong intuition, such very strong experiences that were out of this world and couldn't be explained on a very black and white level, God no longer made sense. And yet I felt closer to God as I tapped into that. So for me, I had no choice as I was becoming more and more authentic to see God for, or spirit, or that higher source, whatever word works, for what it truly is. And so that meant that I had to break out of kind of the shackles of what I was raised within. And that was challenging for some of my loved ones to accept at first. And, I felt like I kind of had to, has come out the closet in a sense, because I wasn't ready to just be casted out. But, I had to trust that if you truly do believe in love as the center of that higher being, then we won't disagree. So I kind of trust in that.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
Mhm.
So, what's some of the like healing work that you've gone through for yourself? I was watching I'm just going to keep bringing up your TikTok. I'm like obsessed. But I was watching one where you were talking about your higher self, and which, first of all, like, I love the concept of our higher self. Could you talk about that actually for a second for people that are like, what does that mean? Who's that? How do you connect?
Yeah, I feel like the higher self for me is almost unanimous, like thinking of God. But I think it's in a term that makes it digestible, because sometimes when I personally think about the highest power that is out there and being that I am that, it's just like, how can I completely identify with that? But when I think of my higher self, it's that version of me that 100% accepts that truth, that I am one with that source. And so it feels like almost that link, that middleman, that completely embodies all that limitlessness is, that infinite presence is. And so it's that voice that guides you on a dark day. It's that nudge that takes you the right way down the right street to avoid the accident. It's that dream that shows up where you get that message that's been, whatever you've been contemplating. I feel like for me, my higher self has been the ability to continue to see beyond illusion. And it's that voice, and it's that lift of that veil. And so it is me. It's that part of me that's untouched, that's unfazed, that is never shaken by the illusion of what we go through and what feels so traumatic here on life. It's that part of me that's forever preserved, if I may. That if any of that makes any sense, that's kind of how I see my higher self. And I feel like it is the truer, fuller version of me. And my challenge in life is to continue to align my awareness more and more with that as my true self, instead of feeling that there is kind of distance, which sometimes there is because of kind of being more in that fleshly state of mind. And my whole life has kind of been a journey of how much I'm willing to accept, listen, and embrace my higher self. And I think that that's honestly kind of what it comes down to for a lot of us.
Yeah, the listening. I really think the listening and the patience could take some trial runs there.
Yeah.
And I really see my higher self too as like me a few steps ahead. And again, what you were saying about like you didn't say unfuck with a bulb, so for some reason that's what my brain went to.
Untouchable though, yes. That is exactly what I said without saying it.
It's just a telepathy moment. Um, but like I think of this very unwavering. Like that's one of
Yeah.
my biggest goals to be bold and unwavering. And this past year, especially with all the craziness, I feel like there's
Right.
been so much more confusion within me than ever before, and I just hate that. It's so frustrating. But reminding myself that there is this version of me, and she's just right in front of me, and
Yeah.
and calling on that, especially in moments where I need to feel more brave or, up my game a little bit. I try to connect, even more like, let's join forces for the next hour. We've got this thing and I need
Right.
you know?
I
Yeah.
think that's beautiful. Yeah, I was actually just talking to my father a couple of days ago, and he was talking about really where we are in the world and the direction that we're going with information overload, and how there's so many things that are coming at us to convince us one way or another. So it's creating so much internal conflict for people who don't know what to decide. Because if you're going outside of yourself for an answer or for information, you're going to get swayed with an equal amount of information either way. And so, as he was saying this, he was talking about some really hard choices that he's had to make for himself that kind of contradict everything that he's ever believed up to this point. But then information is now presenting itself. So it's just hard for people. And I had a deep moment of compassion. And it just reminded me of why I feel like, knowledge and book smarts and information and statistics are so great. But at the end of the day, when you have so much of that is being infiltrated on either side of the spectrum, the one thing that we all can tap back into that, in my opinion, is going to connect back to that one true source is our intuition. It is what the guidance that comes from our higher selves. So as he was saying that, I was like, yeah, this is why I feel like the most important thing for me to do and for humanity to do is go within for these answers and learn to tap back into that answers that come from that inside point. Because looking outside of ourselves, you're going to be pulled equally each way.
Yeah, and really, again, the answer is within you. And I felt that too this year. And I knew that, but I still got pulled both directions. And I had like two really pivotal people in my life with very, like the exact opposite opinion, both, doing the thing. And I could see both sides. And it wasn't helpful, And finally, after kind of months of agonizing over things, I was like, I had to just cut out all the noise and just go, let's talk about me and this human body and my past and what feels right for me, not what everyone else is just yelling. And then I got my answer really fast. And then I felt fully supported, and it was a huge reminder of like, oh yeah. And even as a coach, like working with clients, it's like, I'm not here to tell them what to do. I'm here to help them remember because they have that answer. I'm here to say the right questions and just help remind them and dig down to where that answer is that they're, so I think that's so perfect. So you had mentioned follow the nudge. So let's talk about that. I think that is following the nudges, following the guidance. Let's chat about that for a minute because I think it's so important.
Yeah, this can be a little annoying for me at times. I'm not gonna lie. Like the energy around follow the nudge is one of those that's just like your little sibling that you love so much, but it also just kind of just gets on your nerves because it's very easy to discount these nudges, in my opinion, because sometimes it is just the very small things that seem so insignificant at the time that can have such a big effect on however a situation may unfold or play out. And I feel like as of lately, I'm in a place where I'm consciously trying to create transition for myself. And so the nudges feel a little bit different, and I'm having to pay attention to kind of me asking the questions and then being open to the answer, even if it looks different than what I'm expecting. But in the past, I feel like, what has gotten me to even where I'm at today is the nudge that has gotten me on this path and the amount of times that I ran away from those signs that tried to steer me back in for the sake of whatever. I didn't want to jump into it, didn't want to do the work, wasn't ready to face myself, just wasn't willing to see the signs. And so, I kind of think back to what kick-started my journey and these tools that today have helped me so much that were presented to me initially that I ignored and walked away from and did not pay attention to that have just come full circle. And I just think it's so funny. So when I was a kid, I was super drawn to rocks and minerals. Like I would spend hours outside while everybody else was playing with their dolls or, playing house or whatever they were. I'm going through the rocks to build my collection because I just feel this connection and this energy to these rocks. Now, this is before Google because I'm right at that age where internet didn't really come out until I was a teenager. So I had no kind of insight in regards to crystal energy or healing. All I knew was I had a collection of rocks and they had to pass the test and they had to give me a certain something. And I would also do the same with certain plants. Like that was just something I was very, very in tune with. And of course, I get to that point where I'm a little bit older and we are getting closer to DHL and internet and people are now migrating to chat. And I'm still holding on to some of the things that I really love, but I started to kind of back off with them. Around the same time, I found myself really obsessive with numbers, and I would find myself, and I didn't know anything about numbers, but I just would see them everywhere. I would start adding them up and reducing them, and I didn't know what anything meant. And it got to the point where I really felt like I had an obsessive compulsive disorder. And so I was just like, okay, I'm done with numbers. Like, they mean nothing to me. I'm tired of seeing it. Like, I committed at that point to blocking that out and never ever being involved with it again. And so those were two really, really huge things for me that I just was like, I was a really big prayer warrior. And the way that I was praying felt like it wasn't serving me because it was very much so begging and beseeching. Can we bargain? Like, can we bargain? So even prayer for me was just like, now this has got to go because this doesn't feel right to be hoping that God might show up. Like, that's not it. So like 3 key things that were nudges on things that could help me get through some of the challenges I was going to be faced with, I immediately kind of shut out. And I ended up dealing with some very violent sleep paralysis. And it kind of hit me it hit me out of nowhere. It was before I even knew what it was. And I just remember explaining to my friend what was happening, where I would pass out somewhere, like say on the couch or at my mom's house in her room. And this is when I was a teenager, so I wasn't living on my own yet. And I would just wake up where I could see the room around me, but I wouldn't wake up fully, and it would feel really dark, and there'd be a lot of very low energies where I was clearly hallucinating, but not, and I couldn't breathe right, and it just was so disturbing. And it was happening to me an average of 2 to 5 times a week, whereas studies will show most people will get sleep paralysis up to 5 times in their lifetime. I was getting it regularly. So I was at a point where I'm just like, what is going on? Of course, by the time my grandma found out, she's like, do we need to get an exorcist? Because, we're coming from a Christian background. So she's all kind of worried about me. And so it got to the point where it was just at that time where I was starting to get into kind of going online for answers, and the sleep paralysis was keeping me up. It was preventing me from going to sleep. I was afraid to go to sleep because I honestly felt like something was trying to get to my soul. Oof. And then, of course, as I get online, the first thing that comes up is crystals, and different crystals that have different energies that can help soothe and, help to pass lower frequencies and protect you at night. And I was at a point where I'd already had people praying for me. Like, I was already like doing everything else that I knew. And when I thought about the crystals, I was like, I'm not about to get back into rocks. Like, I had that moment where I was like, there's no freaking way, because it was so many years later. And I don't know that I've ever looked back. I mean, I started to immediately feel relief when I started to incorporate crystals, and that led me into meditation and started to find different ways of praying and listening. And the numbers started to come back up, and it was just all these little nudges that were taking me right back to that same path that I had found myself ignoring. And as soon as I started actually listening and following those little pieces of guidance, I found my way back to the light. But I was painfully struck with what happens when you don't. So
right. Well, that is crazy about the sleep paralysis.
Oh man. And I still get it sometimes to this day, but it's not nearly as uncomfortable. No, it's not as dark or low frequency, and it's not as often, but yeah.
Wow. I feel like, could that also lead into like astral things?
Yes. So what I ended up learning was that some people were actually intentionally trying to put themselves into sleep paralysis so that way they could lucid dream. And I was like, okay, y'all are crazy. Like, this is happening to me and it's insane. But after that time, lucid, yeah, right. I'm like, okay, but then I got it. And then when it becomes controlled, it's not as, panicky as, of course, what I was going through. But I did start lucid dreaming around that same time, but I never connected the two things because I would always lucid dream just by realizing in the middle of a dream, oh, snap, like I know what's going on. So I never even connected the dots there. So for me, after I learned about that, I actually started to, and this just sounds crazy, but this is the platform to talk about it. But I started to practice like out of body experience. I was very very much so like at a point where I could fly in my dreams. And so I was already dabbling along the lines of astral projection. But what I was reading is that, yeah, when you're in that sleep process, it's the perfect time to kind of roll right out your body and like that's really how they would describe it, is roll out. And then and so the craziest experience I had, actually, I remember trying to roll out, do this technique where you're kind of just literally doing that. And I remember kind of bouncing out of my body, looking at my body and seeing it there. And I had a mirror in my room. And I just was, my number one mission was to figure out what this looked like without my flesh. And so I remember like approaching the mirror, and it's just straight up out the Disney movies. Like, just think of all the sparkling stardust that just embodies the silhouette of a human figure, but just clearly is transparent, yet you can still see it. Like, it was just the most magnificent thing. And I remember looking back at my physical body, and then before you knew it, I took out the window, and I think I just ended up in a regular dream after that. But that was all I needed. After that, I was like, okay, I don't need to do any more astral projecting, more out body experiences. Check mark on that. No.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot happening at once, definitely.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting. Multiple times a week, I have dreams where in my dream, I wake up, but I'm still dreaming, and I go tell someone, "Oh, I just had this dream about you, and this happened." I'm explaining my dream and my dream, and then I wake up and I'm like, "Are we done now?"
Right, literally. Oh my God, I'm so glad that you said that, because that has been happening to me for as long as I can remember. And now when it happens, like, I'll become more aware. By the time I'm telling somebody that I'm about the dream, I'm like, wait, am I still in a dream? But not enough to pull me out of it to where I become fully lucid, but I'm like catching on. But then I wake up and I'm like, am I still, who's to say I'm not still dreaming? Because at this point, it feels like I could still be in another dream telling somebody about the dream that was in the dream. So I'm in a really weird place right now with dreams, because it's always been my number one psychic gift. Like, if there's anything that falls within intuition, that has been my gift with spirit, to where I've had premonitions, where I've had conversations with passed on loved ones, where I've just seen things that are inexplainable, where I've done healing and had conversations with people that really needed to happen for me to be able to move on from lessons. It's been dream time. So I feel like it's something I wish we knew more about and were taught more about, because I'm just not convinced that we are honoring that part of our lives the way that we could be, or capitalizing on the healing. So dreams to me is my favorite rabbit hole, my favorite.
Ooh. Okay. I'm gonna start setting some intentions and like working on the dream, because I feel like my dream life is like I'm going to work at an office in a cubicle. It's just always the most normal, boring. Why do I not have sex dreams every night? And when I do, why are they so weird? Like, how can I decide what we're gonna? This should be like wild adventures, riding unicorns. Like, what the heck?
Honestly, with some of my dreams, Blaze, I would trade you that office dream at least a couple times a week, because I'm waking up exhausted. I mean, I'm waking up tired,
Wow.
and it's because I'm doing too much in the dream world. Like, it's just insane. But you did say you like to follow those rules, and that you like to have those rules. So the office, I'm kind of seeing a little bit of.
It's just the real me, some crotchety old man, like I'm working as an accountant in my dreams. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back for a second to following the nudges, because I think some people listening might be thinking, like, but how? How do I know? How can I hear those and know if it's not just me, or like how to tune into that? So I thought of a couple things, because I haven't always been able to hear that voice. And
Right.
I think for me, there were two things that really stood in the way of me getting the best guidance. One was substance abuse, uh, even when it was just off and on, just kind of the general escape. And I spent nearly a decade escaping any means necessary, whether that was alcohol, drugs, it's food, not eating. Like, escape can come in so many forms.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, through that process, making a lot of bad choices, not following the rules, that's for sure. and and so I think in those spaces, like, I stopped trusting myself. So there's no way I was going to trust anything that came through my mind. So, in that moment, full disconnect. And so now I've been sober almost 10 years and I can hear again. I can get quiet. I can listen, and then take that inspired action. And I think, you mentioned prayer. And I think one thing that's been a disconnect for me with prayer is that it's always felt like you're asking for stuff rather than
Yep.
listening, rather than taking action. So,
Mhm.
and also, if you're asking someone for something and then they don't give it to you, now are you mad at them? Like, there's just, I have
It
some
creates a
thoughts.
dynamic. Yeah, it creates a dynamic that's not really, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, no, let's set the intention, let's listen. And then when something comes through, now we need to get up off the floor and go get to work, That without the action, the manifesting stuff, nothing's going to happen. And then one more thing, the other part is people pleasing. That really disconnected me from following the nudges.
Right.
It was all about how can I get approval? How can I make other people happy? And ignoring that I didn't want to be doing half of the things I was doing. It's just because someone thought I was good at it, or someone was being nice to me, or daddy issues, or whatever, and that kept me stuck in cycles, just doing stuff I didn't give a shit about, and just wasting my time. And so I think also one of my big mottos is if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
And to
And
know.
once in a blue moon, there's a maybe that I could get on board with, but it at
Yeah.
least helps guide me because my body knows before my mind starts to go, be nice, Blaze, like just be a nice person, say yes, they need your help. My
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
stomach
Your
will
stomach
literally,
is already just like, eh.
yeah, it's an instant. It's like a text pops up and my stomach is like, I'm like, no, I'm not available for that. Like that's my line.
Yep.
I'm not available for that.
I am not available. And they say our stomach is our second brain. So I think you have really hit the nail on the notch there. And as far as like some of those nudges that I was ignoring for so long, I would say one of the number one reasons was because of people pleasing. And, I don't think at the time I would have called it that or considered it that, but trying to fit in and not willing to walk a separate path that may make you feel temporarily isolated or different from those around you, or, just at odds with yourself if it's something that's new to you that you haven't experienced before. So I think that there's a lot that can easily get in the way. But actually, on one of my TikToks, I mentioned this. So I think it's funny you said that. I think we have to learn to build credit with ourselves. We have to build that credibility with ourselves, and how we do that is going to look different from person to person. Because let's say you're getting these little nudges, such as change your shirt, or like you should be wearing not white pants today, like put on black pants, or take a left and go this way. Like some of the times, I feel like with the nudges, you're not always going to be able to see right away why you were supposed to do something. Like you kind of just have to trust that it was for the right reason. And so that's why I think it can be a little bit hard to immediately just gain the faith just from acting on those nudges. But that's part of it. You have to be willing to just act on some of those things that come up. But I think doing other things for yourself, committing to what goals you set, committing to your tasks for the day, certain things like that just build that credit and that trust. Because if you always tell yourself you're going to do something and you never do it, you automatically are losing trust with yourself. So then when you get these nudges, you don't trust anything that comes up because you don't have that credit with self. So I think that there's different ways to kind of establish that. I think having just rituals of self-care, that is a great way to establish that self-trust and to eliminate the noise. And those two things for me have been the medicine that's made it easier to know when it's time to act on these little things that I'm getting. And to your point, my stomach, like I really it's as simple as that. And I just had this happen the other day where I was faced with a decision where my brain was mentally trying to talk me into something that I could easily pivot perspectives because I'm great with that and see why it would have been acceptable. But I could not overlook the fact that my stomach was doing backflips. And so I'm just like, I'm fighting myself already, and I can feel that. And I just immediately am recognizing that resistance that I've for so long conditioned myself to just misinterpret. So, yeah.
Yeah, and for people listening who have not been super in tune with their body, just start to pay attention, start to witness those feelings. And a lot of people it's the stomach, some people it's the chest. The chest gets tight.
It's tight. Yep.
So it can be different places for different people, but I think it's especially important with around other humans And I've had a few times in my life where I get the closer in proximity I get to someone, it's like
You get those
like sirens
feelings.
are going inside of me. And I've realized too that it doesn't always mean that that's like an evil person. Sometimes it just means that person is not at all in alignment with you. This is not the time for that. And
Right,
I'll just
right.
kind of pivot, you know? And but when I've gone against that, because I try to be like an animal. It's like an animal, when they smell like fear, you know, when there's a danger, they haul ass the other way. They're not like, oh, like, excuse me, we could try to be friends. Can I buy
Maybe
you a
Mr.
present?
Lion. Right.
Yeah. I'm like, no, we don't need to be nice to every single person, you know? I think for women, especially, I feel like a lot of us have been trained to be nice, and I don't think that always serves us. And so it's okay. You could just walk away.
And I'm not even sure exactly how we got to that point in the conversation, Blaze, but the fact that this is speaking to something so relevant for me as far as what I've been going through, like, and part of me has always felt the need to go above and beyond to provide closure for people when I am walking away. And sometimes I just feel like it can cause me to almost have a level of disrespect for myself because I'm trying to go so far to explain and justify why I'm doing what I need to do for me instead of just being completely unapologetic in my truth and making those moves. And yeah, I was kind of literally a couple of days ago confronted with an opportunity to test the waters and then have to confront myself later for why I let myself be in a vulnerable position that was more than likely to not put me within a place of safety and self-respect, or kind of take back that part of myself that has not been able to exercise the word no and not been able to make the right decision in advance. And so I just kind of was like, I've never actually been on the other end of the spectrum where I'm so quick to say no instead of always on the aftermath where I'm thinking about where was that moment before the situation unfolded where I got those red flags. Because I'm always very quick to go back and like reverse engineer a situation to understand like what were those cues, like what were those flags, like what was that gut feeling, like what was it that I ignored that I could have paid more attention to. And as I've been doing that, when the situation recently came up, I was like, oh my God, this is that feeling I've ignored before. Like, this is that weird tingly I've ignored before. Like, this is all those things that I've seen myself completely just letting go over my head. I was being confronted with them and I straight up stood in my power. And it was, believe it or not, something that was very rare for me. And it just happened a couple days ago. And I felt such a wave of like, this interdimensional healing, like beyond time and space, where so many versions of myself needed that for me to be ready for next. So yeah,
Wow.
sometimes it's simple too.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, congratulations. Like that's big. That's big.
Thank you. And I've been thinking about it all week. So the fact that you said that, I'm like, whoo, sis, that was for the crew there. That was
All right. Let's touch on one more topic. I feel like we could talk all night, so there might need to be a part two. But you had mentioned like the idea of leaning into your healing, leaning into the tough stuff, and I think we're in such a busy society where it's like you're rewarded for accomplishments, you're rewarded for hustling and never pausing to rest and take care of yourself and check in and deal with your shit. You know, we
yeah.
just pile work on top of trauma sometimes. And so, what does that look like for you? Just that idea of leaning into your healing.
The lead into this is actually, it's just so ironic because I believe so much in taking those moments to pause and reflect and do the work and do the healing. And I also completely know that the way life is set up, sometimes it can be inconvenient. It can be inconvenient to take that time to process, to cry, to let the shit come up, to feel sad, especially if you work in any kind of profession, which is 90% of us that are dealing directly with others and you have to put on your game face. And in my profession, I am not only dealing with others directly, but I'm the leader in the building. So I definitely feel that pressure to show up as what I would expect my team to show up as. On top of that, I have been blessed with puffy eye syndrome. So for me personally, if I cry, you gonna know it the next day. Like if I cry past 7 p.m., you will know the next day that and I didn't know this about myself for the longest time until I remember being really, really young and I was crying a lot. And this random person on the bus asked me one day, she's like, were you crying last night? And I was like, how did you know? And she's like, your eyes are really swollen. And I've never, like, that's what it took for me, because I just didn't even know. So now I'm very aware. And unfortunately, that's put this extra layer on me of having to plan my tears, and having to plan when I'm sad, and having to plan when I can heal, because I can't consciously go out in public and deal with people when my eyes are swollen shut, because it'll get that bad for me at times. And so I feel like it's been really tough when I can't conveniently strategize when I can do my healing. And I recently had a moment, because I've been pretty good at being able to, like, have my days where I know I can do the work. And so I'll kind of push through it, and I'll take my day off, and I'll unload, and I'll lean into that, and I'll let the stuff come up. But that's not realistic for everyday life. Sometimes you're going to get hit in the moment, and shit is just going to crumble down on you, and you're not going to be able to wait till your day off on Wednesday to cry, so that way you don't have to worry about what you look like. And I'm a firm believer in showing up and doing what you can do to stick to your commitments. And I just had a day recently where everything was feeling so heavy, and I wanted to just keep pushing past it. And I just knew, like, my number one goal in that moment was to, especially with the timing being that I was already so late at night and I had to work early in the morning, like, it was like, if you move into this feeling, you will not be going to work tomorrow. Like, that's just what it's going to come down to. And I never ever make that call. And I was just kind of like, not only forced to do the healing, but I think it was also forced to make a decision to put me first. And so I just made that. I barely even made the choice. I think it kind of just took over me. And I just found myself able to move into perspectives after letting all of the weight and heaviness come up that I was not able to step into beforehand. And I really challenged myself to look at things from as many different eyes as I can when I'm going through something, because that's just a practice I've developed. But I do feel like sometimes, until you let yourself actually feel it, let those lower frequencies migrate and transmute through you, through crying, or through getting angry, or through whatever it is that allows that expression to happen, you may not be able to clear your eyesight to see that perspective, to hear that you're meant to hear. So I think a lot of times we want to bypass those feelings, and bypass having to feel like shit. I mean, there's just really no way around it. And every time I do that, I just find myself prolonging and postponing the amount of work that has to happen before I'm able to actually get to that breakthrough.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I've never heard someone say, I'm having trouble finding time to plan my tears.
It's a real thing.
It is real. It is. And I have 2 kids. And so, especially this past year and a half, we spent a lot of time at home with no babysitters, no breaks. And so, once in a blue moon, the kids would go to my mom or dad's, and I would have all this stuff planned. I'm like, okay, the kids are gonna be gone. I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go work out, or whatever. And the second they would walk out the door, I would just melt. And it was like, and I finally started to expect it, because it was happening I was like, I'm gonna stop planning things. But really, the rage too was a big, like, kind of new thing for me this past year. So a lot of times too, I start with tapping, which is a practice I love, emotional freedom technique. So I start doing that, talking about whatever is going on with me, which in those moments would often lead to tears, and then just like rage out, turn into a monster, like no one's home, I'm gonna freak out. And
Right.
the whole process is maybe 10 minutes, and then I'm exhausted. But like the wave of relief is epic. And it's like, it just has to happen sometimes.
I believe that energy absolutely is contained within our body, and we hold on to those lower energies. And if we don't find a way to release them, tears, screaming, like, I don't want to say punch a wall, punch a bag, or punch, like, whatever you got to do to get it out, like, in a healthy way. And I'm glad that you touched on rage, because a lot of times it's a lot of sadness and heaviness. But I definitely screamed at the top of my lungs in my car recently, and I've never felt that kind of rage where I was able to express it. But when I tell you I felt 10 pounds lighter immediately afterwards, I was like, oh, okay, that was going to get trapped somewhere bad if I didn't let that out.
Yeah. Yes, that is a new practice for me, and it's not frequent, and it's very short lived, but it is like, I'll like tense up every muscle in my body, and I truly feel like I'm a monster, and I'm like making scary sounds. But it is like the most liberating thing.
Oh
And I
goodness.
keep thinking we're in Alaska. I need to go on top of a mountain and do this. But then I get
And
kind of
just
like scared of bears. So, but maybe we can go. Also, I saw in some other cities, I'm not sure where, but if you and I ever want to go into business, we could open a rage room. And I've seen some of these where it is a therapeutic thing. And it's like say it's a yoga studio, but you walk in and there's like punching bags, there's sledgehammers, things you can break. You put on your safety goggles and a helmet and like just go nuts. And
I don't know why we don't already have these. Like honestly, because I productive ways to let out the energy because it's going to come up. The energies are going to come up. And so it's what we do with it. And unfortunately, it's one of those areas of life that there are not many acceptable means to transmute that energy. So that actually sounds like something people would probably get a little too excited about and that would pop up all over the states if we started it. That's kind of dope.
okay, we'll circle back to that. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a good conversation. Do you have any final thoughts for us today?
Honestly, I love that you gave me a chance to get to know a little bit more about you. I felt like we were going to have a lot in common, but I just think it's always ironic how certain messages resonate so deeply with people on their own unique paths. And yet we're also connected in one way or another as far as some of the themes that come up with our healing. So as you keep leaning into your nudges and having that message come through for your clients, I thought that was really awesome because that is like the number one thing for me right now. So I just personally want to say thank you for that and for being patient with me. I'm happy to, go for a round two when we can get that back in because it's just a better platform to just be able to get to know people. So thank you. I'm super excited. And also want to say congratulations because I know that you just launched another program recently. I feel like left and right, you're putting something out there and you're working with new people and collaborating. And I'm really personally inspired by it. So kudos to you, sis.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, drop a comment, leave a review, or DM me so we can keep this conversation going. You can find me on social media at BlazeBellBliss and check out blazebell.com for tons of healing inspo, courses, and resources. Thanks for listening, friends. See you next time.